If it was said that they intended to kill Yang Yi in the beginning because they were afraid that he would expose what had occurred here today, then now they wanted to kill Yang Yi because of his natural talent and potential. When it came to a genius that had comprehended the enlightened sword heart, since he wasn't a member of the Northern Territory, they felt that it was best if he died prematurely. Moreover, they just happened to possess the ability to make him die prematurely. Right when Huang Yen intended to attack, Yang Yi suddenly looked at them and said, "Out of consideration for your senior sister, I'll give you one last piece of advice. I'll allow all of you to leave safely if all of you apologize. What do you think?" Huang Yen was stunned, and then he roared loudly with laughter. He laughed for a short moment before he pointed his finger at Yang Yi and said, "Apologize to you? Then you'll let us leave safely? Little bastard, on what basis do you speak such words? Because you're an expert at the first heaven realm? Or perhaps because you've comprehended the enlightened sword heart? Not to mention that you're only at the first heaven realm. We wouldn't fear you even if you've attained the king realm." When he spoke up to hear, Huang Yen slowly pointed his sword at Yang Yi and said, "Why don't you take your own life, and out of consideration for our senior sister, I'll leave your corpse intact. All right? Ha ha." When they heard him, the other disciples behind Huang Yen instantly roared with laughter, and their gazes towards Yang Yi were filled with ridicule and disdain. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he turned to look at Lui Weii. He shrugged while his face was covered in a helpless expression. "See, they are determined to kill me. Since it's like that, then I can only kill them." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi suddenly shouted loudly, "After watching the show for so long, it's about time that you show yourself, right?" All of them were stunned. "There's someone else here?" Right at this moment, Luo Shui, who'd originally left just now, had suddenly and mysteriously appeared before them. Luo Shui glanced at the disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect before his gaze descended onto Yang Yi, and he said, "Sometimes, humans are even worse than us dark beasts." The expressions of those disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect had instantly changed violently when they saw Luo Shui suddenly appear here. Huang Yen and the others didn't even hesitate in the slightest before they prepared to leave. However, they noticed to their astonishment that the dense horde of dark beasts had suddenly appeared at the ends of their fields of visions. Right at this moment, the sky suddenly dimmed down. When they raised their heads to look over, they saw that a dense expanse of flying dark beasts had covered the sky. They were surrounded once more. The faces of Huang Yen and the others turned even paler. Yang Yi glanced at Huang Yen and the others who had ghastly pale countenances before he said, "You're right. Humans really are worse than dark beasts on many occasions. He didn't intend to let us go at all." Meanwhile, Lui Weii gazed at Yang Yi as she asked this question. "Correct," Luo Shui said. "All of you killed so many dark beasts from my dark beast empire and took their inner cores. So how could I possibly allow all of you to leave safely? Then why did you withdraw earlier?" asked Lui Weii in a low voice. Luo Shui grinned, and then he pointed a finger at Yang Yi and said, "I withdrew because he wanted to protect all of you. I'm utterly unable to kill all of you while he's here, so I could only withdraw. Unfortunately, these disciples of your sect were unaware of this reason. Now, I presume that he wouldn't protect them anymore. Right, Yang Yi?" When he spoke these words, Luo Shui had looked towards Yang Yi. Yes, if he wasn't afraid of that mysterious dark beast that was by Yang Ye's side, how could he have possibly wasted his breath like this? All of them gazed at Yang Yi when they heard Luo Shui. If there was a pill for regret in this world, then they would definitely spare no cost to buy one. What was courting death like? What was being an idiot like? They were exactly that right now. They seemed to be aware that begging for mercy from Yang Yi was useless. So, in next to no time, they gazed at Lui Weii with gazes that were filled with a pleading expression. Lui Weii sighed lightly when she saw them gaze at her, and then she gazed at Yang Yi while her lips parted slightly. She wanted to say something but didn't say anything in the end. Yang Yi sighed lightly when he saw Lui Wei's troubled expression, and then he said, "I understand that you're taking into consideration that they're from the same sect as you. However, are they really worthy of you pleading on their behalf?" people that are ungrateful and narrow-minded like them are truly a waste of energy if they continue living in the world. So, I'm sorry, Yang Yi. We don't need a piece of trash from the Southern Territory like you to plead on our behalf. Right at this moment, Huang Yen gazed at Yang Yi with a savage expression and spoke in a slightly frenzied tone. Us disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect would rather die standing than kneel to preserve our lives. Even if we, members of the Northern Territory, are about to die, we'll die with backbone and die a grand death. Disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, heed my command. Kill Yang Yi with all your might. When they heard Huang Yen, the dispirited eyes of those other disciples had instantly lit up while hot blood surged within them. After that, they didn't hesitate to withdraw their swords and shoot swiftly towards Yang Yi as if they'd gone berserk. Right at this moment, Huang Yen, who was originally the first to charge towards Yang Yi, had shot backward explosively at a speed that was a few times swifter than before. As he shot backward explosively, a pair of wings that were formed from profound energy had suddenly appeared on his shoulders, and they flapped swiftly. In less than the time of a single breath, he'd already appeared over 30 m away. Such a scene had caused all the humans and dark beasts in the surroundings to be stunned. Even the other disciples who were charging towards Yang Yi had stopped on the spot, and then their minds went blank. Where's the backbone and hot blood that Huang Yen revealed just now? Didn't he say he would rather die standing than kneel to preserve his life? Didn't he say that even if he was to die, he would die with backbone and die a grand death? Why has he suddenly changed his tune? Luo Shui shook his head, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After that, the sound of battle resounded from afar, and it continued for a very short period of time. In next to no time, Luo Shui had returned after the time for only a little over 10 breaths. Moreover, he was carrying a person in his hand, and that person was none other than Huang Yen, who'd fled just now. At this moment, Huang Yen wasn't dead yet, but he wasn't really far away from it, because all 4 of his limbs had been severed by Luo Shui. Lui Weiwei's pupils constricted when she saw the horrifying state Huang Yen was in, and then she glanced at Luo Shui with slight astonishment. She was extremely clearly aware of the strength that Huang Yen possessed. Amongst the outer court disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, Huang Yen was ranked at the 5th. However, he was actually easily defeated by this mysterious dark beast. Moreover, he didn't even have the chance to flee. Didn't they say that the profounders and dark beasts of the Southern Territory are extremely weak? If even this is considered as weak, then I'm afraid that besides the Central Territory, all the other territories don't have anyone that's strong. At this moment, Yang Yi was slightly shocked as well. Since the beginning, even though he knew that Luo Shui's strength was very formidable, he'd never seen Luo Shui fight, so he didn't know exactly how strong Luo Shui was. Yet now, he was sure that if he hadn't comprehended 5th-level sword intent, then he would absolutely be unable to defeat Luo Shui, because if he used his full strength, then he was confident in his ability to defeat this profounder from the Northern Territory called Huang Yen. But he knew that he was utterly unable to accomplish it with such ease as Luo Shui had. At this moment, Huang Yen had a ghastly pale countenance, and his eyes were filled with fear and horror as he gazed at Luo Shui. The short period of time that they'd fought earlier had allowed him to realize exactly how terrifying Luo Shui was. Why has such a terrifying dark beast appeared in a lousy place like the Southern Territory? Right at this moment, Huang Yen seemed to have thought of something, and then astonishment in his eyes grew deeper as he spoke in a hoarse voice. "You're a demon." Crack. Huang Yen hadn't finished speaking when the clear and melodious sound of bones breaking resounded. Luo Shui threw Huang Yan's head that still had its eyes opened wide into the horde of dark beasts, and then he gazed at the 5 remaining disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect and said indifferently, "Kill them all." As soon as he finished speaking, the countless dark beasts surged like tidewater towards those 5 disciples. "Senior sister, save us. Senior sister, please take the fact that we're from the same sect into consideration and rescue us junior brothers." "Ah! Senior sister, help me. Yang Yi, I won't let you off even if I become a ghost. Just you wait. I won't let you off. Ah! Brother Yang. Brother Yang. I was wrong. I was..." Yang Yi, my heavenly sword sect won't let you off. My heavenly sword sect will definitely avenge us. Ah! For a time, all sorts of sorrowful howls and insults from those 5 disciples resounded. At this moment, Yang Yi was extremely furious in his heart. What the fuck? I'm not the one killing all of you. It's the dark beasts of the Dark Beast Empire. But all of you aren't insulting them or looking for revenge from them, yet you seek it from me? All of you idiots really do deserve death. Meanwhile, Lui Weii was unable to continue watching in the end, and she flipped her palm. Right when she was about to attack, Yang Yi flashed swiftly to obstruct her path, and then he said, "You ought to be clearly aware that it wouldn't make a difference in the end. Moreover, it would even cause both you and your junior sister to lose your lives. Is it even worth it? It's not a matter of whether it is worth it or not." Lui Weii looked Yang Yi in the eye and said, "We're all from the same sect, so I can't watch indifferently as they die before me. Understand?" Yang Yi understood. These disciples were heartless, but this woman before him was unable to disregard her loyalties. At this moment, Yang Yi didn't know whether he should say she was stupid or someone that was full of character. Every single person had their own principles and standards which they acted on. Yang Yi knew that he shouldn't utilize his own principles and standards to judge the principles and standards of another. So, when he thought up to here, Yang Yi moved aside and said, "I won't stop you. Do what you think is right." Everyone had their own choices, and every single person had to bear the consequences of their choices. Even though he approved of her and sincerely hoped that she could survive, but he respected her choice. "Why aren't you stopping her?" Meanwhile, Yen spoke anxiously. Weii is single-minded sometimes, and she does a bunch of stupid things on a frequent basis. Since you've taken her to be your friend, then why aren't you stopping her? She's going to give her life away." As she spoke, Yen hurriedly grabbed onto Lui Wei's hand as she was deeply afraid that Lui Wei would jump into battle and give her life away. Lui Wei glanced at Yang Yi, and then she stopped hesitating. She pulled her arm from Yen's grasp, and then her figure flashed towards the disciples that were fighting bitterly against the horde of dark beasts. However, right when she intended to charge into the horde of dark beasts, Luo Shui's figure had suddenly obstructed her path. Lui Wei's beautiful brows knit together slightly, and then she didn't hesitate at all to stab her sword towards Luo Shui. When her sword shot forward, it actually carried the sound of wind and thunder, and the terrifying energy contained within it caused Luo Shui's expression to change slightly. 3rd-level sword intent. Yes, Lui Wei hadn't held back, nor did she dare to do so. The strength of this mysterious shape-shifted dark beast before her was truly too terrifying. If she were to still hold back, then not to mention rescuing those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, even she herself would probably be annihilated in a short moment. So, she'd utilized her full strength as soon as she attacked, and she utilized her sword intent without holding back at all. Luo Shui was slightly stunned at first when her sword intent enveloped him. Obviously, he hadn't expected that Lui Wei had actually comprehended sword intent, and it was even at the 3rd level. However, in next to no time he recovered his calm once more. When Lui Wei's sword arrived around 1 m away from him, he suddenly clenched his fist before he smashed it towards that sword which carried terrifying sword intent. Bang! His fist hadn't even come into contact with the sword when the terrifying gale created by its movement shed blasted Lui Wei flying. The winds on Lui Wei's shoulders flapped swiftly in midair, and her figure instantly slowed down before descending firmly on the ground. Lui Wei's pupils constricted when she looked at the sword in her hand, because the center of her Earth-rank sword had completely sunken down. This is an Earth-rank dark treasure. Exactly how terrifying is his strength? Is this really a dark beast from a place with scarce profound energy like the Southern Territory? A string of questions flashed swiftly and incessantly through Lui Wei's mind. At this moment, Yang Yi was extremely shocked as well. Such strength that's capable of blasting 3rd-level sword intent into dispersion with a single punch is truly extremely terrifying. After all, even Yuan Tong was unable to accomplish this. However, Luo Shui was able to accomplish it with ease. So, his strength was truly extremely terrifying, Condensed sword intent and extremely swift reaction. As expected of a genius from the Northern Territory. Luo Shui gazed at Lui Weii as he said, "Unfortunately, since all of you came to my grand myriad mountains and killed the dark beasts of my dark beast empire, then it's best for all of you to just leave your lives behind." Right at this moment, an extremely miserable and shrill cry suddenly resounded. Everyone looked over towards the source of the voice, and they saw that the disciples that were being surrounded by the dark beasts had vanished. In next to no time, they shot their gazes towards the ground, and they noticed that the ground was covered in blood and body pieces. A wisp of sorrow flashed in Lui Weiwei's eyes when she saw this, because some of those disciples had grown up with her. Even though they didn't have a close relationship, they were still from the same sect. So, she was slightly unable to get over the emotions she felt after she watched them die before her. After those dark beasts finished dealing with those disciples of the Heavenly Sword Sect, their gazes had locked onto Lui Weii and Huang Yen. Meanwhile, Yang Yi had moved over to stand before the two of them, and then he gazed at Luo Shui and said, "Let's let the matter rest, all right?" Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before he shook his head and said, "The dark beasts of my dark beast empire can't die for nothing. So they must die." Yang Yi's brows raised, and he said, "So, there's no room for discussion, huh?" "Yes." Luo Shui spoke indifferently. Yang Yi took a step forward, and then he said, "You ought to be clearly aware that numbers are useless against me when it's against dark beasts. In other words, the two of us have to fight here." Luo Shui frowned lightly, and then he said, "According to my knowledge, you, Yang Yi, aren't a person that draws his sword to defend the weak or wronged. So, I'm very curious about why you would help these two people from the Northern Territory. You seem to have only been acquainted with them for a few hours, right?" "What he said is exactly what I want to ask." Meanwhile, Lui Weiwei glanced at Yang Yi, while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in her eyes. She said, "I don't know if you're really that Yang Yi from the Southern Territory who has comprehended the enlightened sword heart, but I know that you're utterly not a match for him. I'm able to sense that he wouldn't make a move against you if you intend to leave. However, you've chosen to stay behind. I'm very curious about why you're acting in this way." Yang Yi chuckled, and then he replied with a question. "I'm very curious as well. Why did you choose to rescue me earlier? After all, I'm only at the first heaven realm, and I'm even a profounder from the Southern Territory." Lui Weiwei was stunned, and then she shook her head and said, "I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that it was within my ability, so I did that." "It was within your ability?" Yang Yi nodded, and then he smiled and said, "I'm doing something within my ability right now as well." Lui Weiwei glanced at Luo Shui, and then she said in a low voice, "He's very strong. Even if you're that Yang Yi who has attained the enlightened sword heart, you're absolutely not a match for him now." Meanwhile, Luo Shui said, "She's very right. Yang Yi, I know that you can surmount realms of cultivation to do battle, and you even possess stronger trump cards. However, I have to tell you that even if you utilize that Dao artifact once more, you who hasn't advanced into the king realm would definitely lose. Out of consideration for it, I'll allow you to leave, and we can have a fair fight once you advance into the king realm in the future." "Perhaps you're right." Yang Yi smiled, and then he said with a serious expression, "But I have very few friends, and I just found one with great difficulty. How could I just watch as she dies? So, I intend to give it a try. A friend." Luo Shui shook his head and smiled, and then he pointed at Lui Weiwei and Huang Yen as he said, "Yang Yi, you seem to have taken all of this for granted. Just ask them, have they taken you to be their friend? Even if they say that they have, would you believe it? All of this is one-sided right now. Understand?" "Perhaps," Yang Yi said with a smile on his face. "But I still intend to act in this way." "Give me a reason," said Luo Shui in a low voice. "A reason?" Yang Yi shook his head and said, "At many times, there's no need for a reason when we do something, right? Besides that, whether they've taken me to be a friend of theirs isn't important to me. What's important is that I'm willing to take them as my friends. And that's enough for me." At the very least, they were my friends earlier, and they are my friends right now. As for the future, that's something for the future. Both of them went silent when they heard Yang Yi. Had they taken Yang Yi to be their friend? The answer was no. As for the reason, there were truly too many reasons. For example, they just met Yang Yi. They were members of the Northern Territory while Yang Yi was from the Southern Territory. In short, as far as they were concerned, friendship was something that was gradually formed through a period of getting along with each other and possessing similar interests and goals. However, Yang Yi had taken them to be his friends because of something they'd done without giving it any thought. Moreover, he was even willing to risk his life to help them. This caused both of them to be puzzled and bewildered. Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before he said, "You don't care about the thoughts of the world and only act according to your heart. Now, I slightly understand why you were able to comprehend 4th level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. Fine, out of consideration for it, I'll let the two of them go if you're able to withstand a punch of mine without moving backward. What do you think? Of course, if you're unable to withstand it, then you can die along with the two of them. I'll do it." Meanwhile, Lui Weii suddenly walked over to stand by Yang Ye's side, and she glanced at Yang Yi before she said, "Third-rank sect of the Northern Territory, the Heavenly Sword Sect's Lui Weii." Yang Yi was stunned, and then he smiled and said, "I don't have many friends. You'll be one from today onward." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at Luo Shui before he said, "I know that you're very strong, and I know that you weren't bragging just now. However, why would I, Yang Yi, need someone to make concessions for me? Withstand a punch of yours without moving backward? How about we change the rules?" "What do you mean?" said Luo Shui in a low voice. "Ha ha!" Yang Yi roared with laughter, and then he said, "If you're able to withstand a strike of my sword without moving backward, then you can do as you please with the three of us. What do you think about that?" Luo Shui's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he said in a low voice, "Yang Yi, could it be that you think that you're extremely formidable because you seized the first position on the Ascension rankings and defeated Yuan Tong? I admit that if you attained the King Realm, then the chances of victory in a battle between the two of us would be 70:30. However, you're only at the first heaven realm, so as I said before, I'll still be able to kill you even if you utilize that Dao artifact." "Why don't we give it a try then?" said Yang Yi. "As you wish." Luo Shui spoke in a low voice, and then he suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot. Suddenly, the entire ground suddenly trembled violently like it was an earthquake. On the other hand, Luo Shui himself had instantly shot forward towards Yang Yi like a bolt of lightning. His speed was so swift that both Lui Weii and Huang Yen were unable to see his figure clearly. At the instant that Luo Shui had moved, Yang Yi had flipped his palm, and then a low-grade earth-rank sword had appeared in his hand. After that, the profound energy within his dantian started circulating madly. In an instant, all the profound energy within his dantian had surged violently into his sword. Moreover, his 4th-level sword intent had even instantly sprayed out and wrapped around his sword. Once this was done, he added on the physical strength that he possessed before he slashed his sword down forcefully towards Luo Shui. When facing this mysterious shape-shifted dark beast, Yang Yi really didn't dare be careless at all. However, he still didn't utilize the nether ghost flames and 5th-level sword intent. Yang Yi was confident that if he utilized any one of them, then blasting Luo Shui back would definitely be an extremely easy task. However, after a moment of hesitation, he'd chosen not to utilize them in the end. They were his greatest trump cards right now. If he utilized them now, then they wouldn't be trump cards anymore. Especially the nether ghost flames, he would absolutely not utilize it unless he was confident in his ability to kill his opponent. Because once he utilized it, it was very likely that it would bring down calamity upon him. Under the astounded gazes of the two women, Yang Ye's sword and Luo Shui's fist collided forcefully with each other. Bang! A world-shaking bang instantly resounded. At the same time, the ground where both of them stood had instantly collapsed. After that, Yang Yi and Luo Shui shot backward explosively in opposite directions, and it wasn't long before they stopped moving. At this moment, Yang Yi had an extremely solemn expression. because he'd moved 18 back while Luo Shui had moved 15 back. Moreover, only half of the sword in his hand remained right now. Yes, at the moment his sword collided with Luo Shui's fist, the sword in his hand had been instantly blasted into half by the terrifying force that Luo Shui's fist carried. It was an earth-rank sword. However, such a sword had been blasted into half just like that. This caused Yang Yi to have no choice but to reevaluate Luo Shui's strength. At this moment, Luo Shui's expression was slightly solemn as well, because he noticed that he seemed to have underestimated Yang Yi. Even though he'd merely utilized less than 60% of his strength just now, that 60% of strength wasn't something that a profounder at the First Heaven Realm could resist. However, the facts of the situation showed that Yang Yi hadn't just resisted his strength. Yang Yi had even blasted him backward. This caused him to be slightly shocked. Lui Weii and Huang Yen were even more shocked than Luo Shui was. They didn't know how strong Luo Shui was, but they knew how strong Huang Yen was. Huang Yen was slightly weaker than Lui Weii, but he was only able to survive for a few breaths of time in front of Luo Shui. However, Yang Yi was able to fight Luo Shui equally. In other words, Yang Yi's strength far surpassed them. Didn't they say that the profounders of the Southern Territory are extremely weak? Didn't they say that the profounders of the Southern Territory can't resist a single blow? At this moment, both Lui Weii and Huang Yen wanted to drag over the person who said all of this and chop that person into pieces. Are these two people before us weak? If they are considered to be weak, then all the geniuses of the Northern Territory are probably weaklings. Of course, the true source of their shock was the 4th-level sword intent that Yang Yi utilized just now. Sword intent wasn't just rare in the Southern Territory, it was extremely rare in the Northern Territory and the other territories. Yet Yang Yi had attained the 4th level of sword intent before the age of 20. When it comes to such natural talent, then in the entire Heavenly Sword Sect, only senior brother Yuan Guoxiu can compare to him. Of course, the precondition to this was that Yang Yi hadn't attained the enlightened sword heart. Otherwise, not to mention the Heavenly Sword Sect, it would be impossible to find someone who could compare to Yang Yi even in the Immortal Sword Sect, which was a 5th-rank sect. 4th-level sword intent, gold element profound energy, and physical strength that's comparable to a king realm dark beast of my dark beast empire. Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi as he spoke in a deep voice. Needless to say, your strength is really not bad. If you attain the king realm, then there'll probably be very few in the Southern Territory who can be a match for you. Yang Yi shook his head and said, there are numerous monstrous geniuses in the world. Even if we disregard everyone else, I wouldn't be confident in my ability to defeat you even if I attained the king realm. He was telling the truth, because Luo Shui's strength really was extremely strong. It was even to the extent that it was much stronger than Yuan Tong. Just as Luo Shui had said, he would probably be unable to kill Luo Shui even if he utilized a Dao artifact. This was a feeling he had. Luo Shui gazed at Yang Yi for a short moment, and a wisp of surprise immediately flashed through his eyes when he saw Yang Yi's rosy face remain completely calm and composed. And then he said, you've truly surprised me. We'll meet at the ancient battlefield. As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Shui glanced deeply at Yang Yi before he led the horde of dark beasts along with him and vanished from their fields of vision. Lui Weii was just about to say something when she saw Luo Shui leave. However, right at this moment, a mouthful of blood suddenly sprayed from Yang Yi's mouth, and then his face swiftly turned ghastly pale. Both the two women were shocked, and then Lui Weii said, you're injured. I'm fine. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he gazed towards the direction Luo Shui had left towards while his expression turned slightly more solemn. At the instant that his sword collided with Luo Shui's fist just now, besides the fact that his sword had snapped, he'd also sensed a strand of mysterious force suddenly travel through his sword and enter his body. After the mysterious energy entered his body, it started to rage throughout his body and ceaselessly damaged the meridians within his body. Moreover, to his astonishment, the golden profound energy within his dantian was actually unable to suppress this mysterious energy. Fortunately, when that energy started to damage his dantian, the tiny vortex within his body had finally acted, A strand of suction force had suddenly surged out from within the tiny vortex. Under the effects of this suction force, the mysterious energy had been instantly absorbed into the tiny vortex, and then it transformed into nothingness. Even though the tiny vortex had dealt with the mysterious energy, Yang Yi was still heavily injured right now because numerous meridians within his body had been damaged. That was the reason why he'd spat out a mouthful of blood just now. The reason he'd acted as if he was fine in front of Luo Shui was that he'd sensed Luo Shui's killing intent. Yes, his intuition told him that if he revealed even the slightest sign of being injured, then Luo Shui would definitely attack him with the intent to kill. Without the little fellow by his side, he didn't have any chance of survival while he faced Luo Shui and the countless dark beasts in the surroundings. So he had no choice but to endure the heart-rending pain within him just now. Fortunately, the pain he experienced from having his meridians damaged was extremely inferior when compared to the pain that the nether ghost flame had caused him that day. It was exactly because of this that he was able to avoid exposing the injuries he'd suffered to Luo Shui. Of course, Yang Yi was unable to figure out why Luo Shui would arouse killing intent towards him. Was it because of the little fellow? Or was it because of something else? On the other side, Luo Shui had an extremely solemn expression as he gazed at the deep mark of a sword on his fist. The mark that was over a few inches long had been inflicted by Yang Yi just now. He'd utilized numerous methods to eliminate this mark. However, they were all useless, because this mark contained sharp 4th-level sword intent. Of course, the thing he attached the most importance to was the fact that Yang Yi was actually able to break through his defenses. If Yang Yi had attained the King Realm and broken through his defenses, then he wouldn't feel surprised by it. However, Yang Yi was merely at the First Heaven Realm now. Even if Yang Yi possessed 4th-level sword intent, it was impossible to break through his defenses while merely at the First Heaven Realm. But Yang Yi had accomplished such a feat. This was the reason why he'd aroused killing intent towards Yang Yi. Because Yang Yi's strength and potential had already aroused fear in him. Moreover, Yang Yi just happened to be a human who was heading to the ancient battlefield. In other words, it was very likely that Yang Yi would be heading to the ancient battlefield to fight for karmic luck for the humans. If Yang Yi were to seize karmic luck for the humans, then it would definitely be bad news for the Dark Beast Empire. So, for the sake of preventing such great trouble from descending onto the Dark Beast Empire in the future, he was prepared to kill Yang Yi. However, to his surprise, Yang Yi remained completely unaffected after his nether energy of death had entered Yang Yi's body. This caused him to instantly abandon his intentions to attack Yang Yi. What was the nether energy of death? It was like Yang Yi's nether ghost flame, and it was a treasure of the heavens and the earth. However, unlike Yang Yi's nether ghost flame, Luo Shui's nether energy of death wasn't created from the energy of the heavens and the earth, and it was intentionally created by profounders. Such energy of death was only be formed when someone had just perished, and it had to be preserved with a secret technique. After that, the energy of death could only be converted into a part of one's own strength after it was refined innumerable times. Of course, the energy of death within a single person was insufficient. In order to form the type of nether energy of death that Luo Shui possessed, the energy of death from at least 1 million people was required. Once this energy of death came into contact with a living being, it would enter the living being's body and destroy the vitality within the body. However, this sort of energy of death wasn't terrifying because it could destroy the vitality within the body. It was terrifying because it was impossible to destroy. Even the profound energy of the 5 elements was unable to destroy such energy of death. In the past, Luo Shui had relied on this energy of death to kill a human expert at the spirit realm. Even a spirit realm expert was unable to resist the energy of death, but it was utterly useless against Yang Yi. So, Luo Shui was deeply bewildered by this. "Are you all right?" Lui Weii gazed at Yang Yi, who sat cross-legged on the ground, as she asked in a light voice. Right when Yang Yi was about to say something, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then a strand of cold light shot swiftly like a bolt of lightning towards Yang Yi's throat. This sudden and unexpected change in the situation caused the expressions of Lui Weii and Huang Yen to change. However, They were powerless to lend a hand at this moment because the appearance of that black shadow was too sudden and the black shadow's attack was too swift. It was swift to the point they were utterly unable to react before it had arrived in front of Yang Ye's throat. As he gazed at Yang Yi, who was right before him, Leng Jun couldn't help but reveal a smile. He'd just arrived here, yet he'd noticed to his pleasant surprise that Yang Yi was actually heavily injured. Why was Yang Yi heavily injured? He hadn't thought about this problem, nor did he need to think about it. In any case, his objective was to kill Yang Yi. So, this moment was the perfect opportunity. Out of consideration for the terrifying physical defense that Yang Yi possessed, he hadn't held back this time, and he'd utilized his full strength. This time, he was confident. So long as his dagger came into contact with Yang Ye's throat, then it just had to slit open a small cut open on Yang Ye's throat, and then Yang Yi would definitely perish. Because he'd smeared an extraordinary poison that was a mixture of over 1,000 poisons onto the dagger. Not to mention a profounder at the first heaven realm, even a profounder at the spirit realm would definitely die without the antidote. Yet now, his dagger was less than half an inch away from Yang Ye's throat. So, Yang Yi was unable to evade it even if he executed a heaven rank movement technique. In other words, Yang Yi was dead. However, right at this moment, a layer of violet light that was thin as a cicada's wing had suddenly appeared on Yang Ye's throat. The violet light was like skin that stuck tightly onto the skin on Yang Ye's throat. Right at this moment, Leng Jun's dagger came into contact with Yang Ye's throat. Right, it should be the layer of violet light instead. Clang. A clear and melodious clang resounded, and then Leng Jun was stunned, because he noticed that it felt as if he'd struck his dagger against dark iron, and the force from the collision shook his arm to the point it felt numb. When he focused his gaze towards the point of collision, he finally noticed that an extremely thin layer of violet light had suddenly appeared on Yang Ye's throat. During this instant that he was dazed, a little violet-colored fellow had suddenly appeared in front of him. The little violet-colored fellow gazed at him, blinked, and then it raised its claw. When he saw this little fellow that made a sudden appearance here raise its claw, a feeling of danger suddenly arose in Leng Jun's heart, and he didn't hesitate at all to flash backward explosively. Right at the instant that he'd just retreated, a strand of violet light had mysteriously appeared where he stood just now. Leng Jun felt a wave of fear when he saw the violet arc of light, and it was even to the extent that some cold sweat had appeared on his forehead. Moreover, he felt fortunate in his heart. Luckily, I retreated swiftly, otherwise, I would have definitely been struck by it. Right at this moment, that arc of violet light had suddenly vanished on the spot, and it directly appeared in front of Leng Jun in the next moment. Leng Jun was astounded, and he didn't hesitate to utilize his movement technique to shoot backward explosively. Right at the instant that he'd shot backward, 3 arcs of violet light appeared out of thin air behind him. It was like Leng Jun himself had moved to collide with those 3 arcs of violet light, and he let out a shrill cry while his body was blasted flying. How could Yang Yi let such a great opportunity slip by? He'd moved forward when Leng Jun retreated explosively for the second time, and then he drew his sword and slashed it towards Leng Jun, who was shooting explosively towards him right now. Leng Jun was already heavily injured from being blasted by those 3 arcs of violet light. However, he was still alive. After all, he was a King Realm expert. Leng Jun's pupils constricted violently when he saw Yang Ye's sword slash down towards him. How could he dare go head-on against Yang Yi at this moment? So, he immediately forcefully endured the roiling profound energy in his body and the injuries on his back as he executed his movement technique once more, and he flashed towards the side. However, right at this moment, 3 strands of violet light had mysteriously appeared on his right, and just like before, it seemed like he'd taken the initiative to collide with them. When he sensed the violet light that had appeared abruptly on his right, Leng Jun was terrified this time, because he noticed that the movement technique which he took pride in and knew was able to allow him to flee from even a spirit realm expert seemed to be useless this time. Bang! Along with an explosion, Leng Jun was blasted in the opposite direction, and he flew for around 15 m before his figure smashed to the ground. However, he was still alive, but he was in an extremely miserable state. His black clothes had transformed into ash while his entire body was mangled. If his head wasn't still attached to his body, there would probably be no one capable of recognizing that this was the body of a man. After falling to the ground for less than 2 breaths of time, Leng Jun suddenly leaped up into the air like a leopard that was hunting its prey, and then he shot explosively towards the distance and even swiftly concealed himself. After he'd concealed himself, Leng Jun instantly heaved a sigh of relief, and he felt fortunate that he'd once paid a huge price to purchase a high-grade healing talisman. If it wasn't for that talisman, then he would have definitely died this time. Yes, when he was struck by the violet light for the second time, Leng Jun hadn't hesitated to slap that high-grade healing talisman onto his body, and it was exactly this talisman that had preserved his life. Moreover, it even allowed him to have some strength to flee. Now, there was only a single thought in his mind, and that was to flee with all his might. He wanted to run from the Grand Myriad Mountains and never try to assassinate Yang Yi again. He'd found out from the information the League of Doom had gathered on Yang Yi that Yang Yi possessed a mysterious king-rank dark beast. However, he didn't take it seriously at that time because he was very confident in his movement technique. In his opinion, not to mention a king-rank dark beast, even a spirit-rank dark beast would be helpless against him if he was determined to flee. However, this incident told him that he was wrong. That mysterious little fellow was 10 times more terrifying than any spirit realm dark beast, because the movement technique he took pride in was utterly useless before that mysterious little fellow. Moreover, that mysterious king-rank dark beast's attacks were even more mysterious and terrifying than his movement technique. When he thought about those strange attacks, Leng Jun's entire body couldn't help but shudder. At this moment, he'd decided to give up on assassinating Yang Yi. He still had a chance to kill Yang Yi if that mysterious little fellow wasn't present. But he had no chance at all with the mysterious little fellow present by Yang Ye's side. Not to mention a chance to kill Yang Yi. The slightest mistake might even lead to his death. When he thought up to here, Leng Jun sped up once more. However, right at this moment, that mysterious king-rank dark beast had suddenly and shockingly appeared in front of him. After that, the mysterious little fellow blinked before it raised its little claw. Leng Jun's eyes opened wide when he saw this, and they were filled with shock. He was just about to turn around and flee. However, the violet mink's claw had descended at the exact same instant that this thought had appeared in Leng Jun's mind. Subsequently, a square-shaped violet-colored barrier of light had appeared around Leng Jun. Leng Jun didn't hesitate at all to strike his dagger against the barrier of light. Bang! The violet barrier of light didn't shake at all, while Leng Jun's arm felt numb instead. After that, his figure was blasted flying, but he didn't fly far because he'd collided with the barrier of light behind him. Leng Jun was filled with despair as he gazed at the thin barrier of light around him. While Leng Jun was filled with despair, Huang Yen and Lui Weii were shocked. Since Leng Jun appeared, until the moment the little fellow appeared, and then the battle came to an end right now, both of them had been completely shocked. It was naturally that little fellow who had shocked them. The mysterious violet light and the shocking barrier of light created by the little fellow made them feel shock and deep fear at the same time. Because this strange method of attack was truly too mysterious, and it was mysterious to the point of being impossible to evade. The movement technique possessed by that black figure had already shocked them and caused fear to arise in their hearts. But it was too much more inferior when compared to the violet light. What sort of dark beast is that little fellow? Their minds were filled with questions right now because they weren't able to determine the little fellow's origins even with the knowledge and experience that they possessed. After it trapped Leng Jun, the violet mink flicked in midair and arrived in front of Yang Yi. After that, it rubbed its head against Yang Ye's face in an intimate manner. Yang Yi smiled as he gazed at the little fellow, and a wisp of a gentle expression flashed in his eyes. He stretched out his hand to rub the little fellow's head as he said, "Little fellow, long time no see, huh?" The violet mink blinked before it rubbed its head against Yang Ye's palm. "Are you at the spirit rank now?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. The violet mink shook its head, and then it started gesturing with its little claws. After a period of difficult communication, Yang Yi finally found out that the little fellow was still a king-rank dark beast. However, it was no ordinary king rank dark beast, because the little fellow was at the peak of the king rank. Just like the Earth Bear King from before, the violet mink was already half a step into the spirit rank. This caused Huang Yi to feel extremely delighted because once the little fellow stepped foot into the spirit rank, then he could subdue shape-shifted dark beasts at the spirit rank to fight on his behalf. Just think about it, if a large group of shape-shifted dark beasts at the spirit rank appeared with a wave of his hand one more. Huang Yi finally went over to Lung Jun after he played with the little fellow for a while. He gazed at Lung Jun, who was trapped behind the violet barriers of light, as he chuckled lightly and said, "So you're still alive? I thought you would have taken your own life. Since you didn't, then it means you don't want to die. You can live if you want. You just have to answer a few questions of mine. What do you think?" Lung Jun gazed coldly at Huang Yi and remained silent. Huang Yi restrained his smile and said, "I don't like to waste my breath, so I'll count to 3. If you don't answer me after I count to 3, then you have to die even if you don't want to. 1. Lung Jun's eyelids twitched, but he still didn't speak. 2. Lung Jun's face fell, but he still remained silent because he knew what Huang Yi wanted to ask, and he couldn't answer such a question. Because once he answered Huang Yi, then it meant that he would have to face the endless pursuit of the League. The League of Doom permitted its assassins to fail, but they were prohibited from betrayed. Once they betrayed the League, then the League wouldn't let them go even if they fled to the ends of the world. However, if he didn't answer, then he would die right now. As he gazed at Lung Jun, who remained silent, Huang Yi said indifferently, "Little fellow, kill him." When it heard Huang Yi, the violet mink instantly raised its claw, and then the violet mink didn't hesitate to wave it lightly. After that, a strand of violet light directly appeared behind the barrier of light, and it blasted down towards Lung Jun, who was already heavily injured. Lung Jun was shocked in his heart. He didn't want to die right now, so he immediately spoke without thinking. "Wait!" Huang Yi was about to speak when he heard this, but it was already too late because the violet light had struck Lung Jun. Bang! Lung Jun was blasted flying once more, and then he collided forcefully with the barrier of light behind him and was bounced forward again. After that, he lay on the ground without moving at all, and his fate was unknown. The violet mink glanced at Huang Yi, and then it revealed an innocent expression. It seemed to be saying that Lung Jun was too late. Huang Yi shook his head with a helpless expression, and then he asked the little fellow to open up the barrier of light. He walked over and checked Lung Jun before he said, "Luckily, he's still alive." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at the violet mink and said, "Little fellow, do you have any method to control him?" "Right. The type that will make him have to obey me once he recuperates." The violet mink blinked, and then rubbed its chin with its little claw. It pondered deeply for a long time before its eyes lit up, and then it waved its little claw at Lung Jun. In an instant, Lung Jun's brows had knit together tightly, and his face was covered in an expression of pain. In next to no time, and under the astounded gazes of Huang Yi and the 2 women, a strand of mysterious black gas had slowly floated out from Lung Jun's body, and then it floated in front of Huang Yi. Separation of the soul. When she witnessed this scene, Lui Weii gazed at the little fellow and suddenly cried out involuntarily, "You're actually able to separate the soul of a person. You! This! How could this be possible? How could this be possible? Separation of the soul?" Huang Yi frowned. Could it be that this strand of black gas is that assassin's soul? At this moment, Lui Weii was extremely shocked, and it should be said that she was shocked to the extreme. It was common knowledge that the soul of a person consisted of many different parts. However, even though this was common knowledge, it was utterly impossible for one to see and take control of one's own soul unless one possessed a secret technique or some sort of special technique. The soul was a slightly ethereal and unreal thing, because it really existed in the body, yet it was impossible to sense or control. Even if it belonged to you, besides the residents of the Nether Territory, there was only one sort of existence capable of controlling their own souls and utilizing the soul to execute attacks, and it was extraordinary experts at the Monarch realm. The reason the members of the Nether Territory were capable of accomplishing it was because they weren't people at all, and they were souls, or what people called ghosts. On the other hand, monarch realm experts possessed extraordinary cultivations themselves, and they had attained an inconceivable height. So, not to mention their own souls, they were even able to observe their destiny slightly. To put it simply, only monarch realm experts and those ghosts of the nether territory were able to directly affect the soul of another. However, this little fellow before them wasn't from the nether territory, nor was it a monarch rank dark beast. However, it was able to forcefully separate the soul of a person. What sort of monstrous genius is this? Even though he was slightly shocked by the little fellow's ability to separate the soul of the black-robed assassin, he wasn't as shocked as Lui Weii was, because Qin Xie had done so in the past. Even though he guessed that the strand of the soul which Qin Xie gave him was fake, it made him feel that while the separation of the soul was slightly mysterious, it wasn't especially rare. "He'll obey me in the future with this in my possession?" asked Yang Yi while he gazed at the black gas that was enveloped by violet light. The violet mink nodded. Why? Yang Yi wasn't ashamed to constantly ask questions in order to broaden his knowledge. The violet mink blinked, and it gazed at Yang Yi while being at a loss for how to explain it. Obviously, it was very difficult for it to explain the answer to Yang Ye's question. Because with this strand of the soul in your possession, you only need a single thought to make living worse than death for this assassin. Meanwhile, Lui Weii suddenly said, "A person has 3 spiritual and 6 physical souls, and they are one." When she spoke up to hear, Lui Weii glanced at the violet mink with a complicated expression on her face, and then she continued. However, a spiritual soul of his was extracted by force. In other words, you can rely on this spiritual soul to affect the other 2 spiritual souls and 6 physical souls. Just a single thought of yours would be sufficient to make living worse than death to him. Even an Exalt realm expert would probably be unable to endure that sort of pain that comes from the depths of the soul. It's that formidable? Yang Ye's eyes lit up, and then he said, "Let me try." When he spoke up to hear, he issued a command in his heart, and a strand of sword intent smashed directly onto the strand of black gas. Right at this moment, Ling Jun, who'd fallen unconscious, had suddenly let out an extremely miserable and shrill cry. After that, his body twitched as if he'd been electrocuted. Moreover, the features on his face had instantly warped. It simply seemed as if he was experiencing unimaginable pain. Yang Yi was shocked by Ling Jun's reaction, but in next to no time he started laughing, because from now onward, he had an extraordinary lackey at the King realm, and it was even an assassin. A wisp of pity flashed in Lui Weiwei's eyes as she gazed at Ling Jun, who was writhing in pain on the ground. However, she didn't say anything because she was aware that if Yang Yi hadn't had the assistance of that little fellow, then he would probably have perished by now. Moreover, if Yang Yi perished, then the assassin would probably not let Kai Yan and her go. She was naturally not afraid of a head-on collision with the assassin. However, when she thought about that assassin's shocking movement technique, she couldn't help but shudder with fear. After a moment of delight, Yang Yi turned to look at the little fellow before he spoke with slight displeasure. "Little fellow, since you possessed such an ability, then why didn't you tell me in the past?" Yes, if the little fellow told him about it sooner, then he could possess numerous extraordinary experts to fight for him. Even if he couldn't subdue numerous extraordinary experts, just torturing them to death in such a way was perfect. For example, the Flower Palace's Feng Yi. The little fellow instantly revealed a wronged expression when it heard Yang Yi, and then it started waving its little claws about. Before long, Yang Yi understood that the little fellow was saying that it couldn't accomplish this in the past, and the reason it could now was because its strength had improved. Right at this moment, Lui Weii suddenly asked, "Yang Yi, is it from the demon territory?" "The demon territory?" Yang Yi frowned, and then he said, "What's that? You don't know the demon territory?" Kai Yan opened her eyes wide as she gazed at Yang Yi, and it was like she was looking at an idiot. Lui Weii was slightly stunned as well. Obviously, she hadn't expected that Yang Yi didn't even know of the demon territory. Yang Yi was slightly embarrassed from being looked at in such a manner by them, and he immediately said, "Please do tell. When she noticed that Yang Yi didn't seem to be acting, Lui Weii glanced at him with a strange gaze before she said in her heart, "Exactly how isolated is the Southern Territory?" Lui Weii stopped thinking about this and said, "Since Profounder Continent was split apart by those two extraordinary experts, it was divided into numerous territories, and one of them is called the Demon Territory. There are no humans there, and only demon beasts reside there. Right, they are what you residents of the Southern Territory call dark beasts. Of course, no matter if it's strength, bloodline, or type, the dark beasts of the Grand Myriad Mountains are utterly unable to compare to the demon beasts that reside there. After all, the four great divine beasts of the ancient times exist within the demon territory." Yang Yi was shocked in his heart when he heard this. The four great divine beasts of the ancient times. In other words, the legendary dragon race exists in the demon territory. Moreover, the little fellow is from such a place. Lui Weii glanced once more at the violet mink with a complicated expression, and then she said, "Its method of attack is truly too mysterious. I think that there aren't any dark beasts and humans in the world that aren't afraid of it. Logically speaking, such a type of demon beast should be extremely famous in the demon territory. However, there's no information about it within the information of the demon territory which my heavenly sword sect possesses. This is exactly why I'm bewildered." Yang Yi turned to look at the violet mink, and then he stretched out his hand to rub its little head before he said, "Little fellow, are you from the demon territory?" The violet mink blinked, and then its eyeballs started to spin. When he saw this, Yang Yi rubbed the little fellow's head with a helpless expression on his face, and then he said, "Stop trying to avoid it and answer me." The violet mink fell silent for a short while before it nodded. After that, it seemed to have thought of something, and it flashed onto Yang Ye's shoulder and rubbed its head against Yang Ye's face. When she saw the violet mink nod, Lui Weii gazed at Yang Yi and sighed. She hesitated for a moment before she said, "Even though I don't know why it's staying by your side, what I want to tell you is that the demon territory is very hostile towards the entire human race. In other words, if those demon beasts of the demon territory find out that it's staying by your side, then you'll probably be in great trouble." "Great trouble?" Yang Yi roared with laughter, and then he said, "The trouble I face has never been little, so what if I have a little more? In any case, so long as the little fellow isn't willing to leave, then no one can separate us, regardless of whether it's a human or demon beast. If anyone thinks of doing that, then I'll make him regret being born." When it heard Yang Yi, a strand of violet light suddenly flashed in the violet mink's eyes, and then it blinked at Yang Yi before it rubbed its little head against Yang Ye's face. "Stop bragging." Meanwhile, Yen said, "You don't know how terrifying those fellows from the demon territory are. If you know how formidable they are, then you wouldn't say that." Yang Yi smiled, and then he said, "Even if they are formidable, are they as formidable as my little fellow?" Yen was instantly speechless. She'd personally witnessed the ability of this little fellow. In this world, perhaps only the legendary divine beast, Phoenix, could match this little fellow's speed. On the other hand, any other demon beast or human could only suffer a beating when facing this little fellow. Yang Yi suddenly asked, "By the way, will the members of the demon territory be coming to the ancient battlefield?" "Of course they will." Lui Weii said, "The ancient battlefield is related to karmic luck, so the demon territory will naturally dispatch some of its geniuses." When she spoke up to hear, Lui Weii seemed to have thought of something. She glanced at Yang Yi and the violet mink before she sighed and said, "It's best that you ask it to hide itself once you arrive at the ancient battlefield. Otherwise, if those demon beasts from the demon territory find out that it's from the demon territory as well, both of you will be in great trouble." Yang Yi grinned, and then he gazed at the little fellow and said, "Are you afraid?" The little fellow shook its head in a very resolute manner. What a joke! It wasn't afraid of any demon beasts in the world. Yang Yi smiled and said, "I'm not afraid as well." Lui Weii sighed. She hesitated for a moment before she said, "Brother Yang, your natural talent and potential is truly being buried in the Southern Territory. I wonder if Brother Yang is interested in heading to the other territories." You want me to head to the Northern Territory and join the Heavenly Sword Sect? Asked Yang Yi. Lui Weii nodded and said, if Brother Yang joins the Heavenly Sword Sect, I guarantee that Brother Yang will immediately ascend to the ranks of inner court disciples. Moreover, the sect will foster Brother Yang with all its might. No matter if it's medicinal pills, cultivation techniques, or combat techniques, my Heavenly Sword Sect will give Brother Yang the best. Forget it. Yang Yi refused and said, I think that all these sources of reliance can't be relied on. The most important factor is still one's own strength, because it's the true foundation of everything. Of course, there was something else that Yang Yi hadn't said, and it was that he truly felt extreme contempt towards the character of those disciples from the Heavenly Sword Sect, and he felt that the higher-ups of the Heavenly Sword Sect weren't any different. When she heard Yang Ye's refusal, Lui Weii still wanted to say something. However, Yang Yi waved his hand, and then he tossed 2 high-grade healing talismans and 2 high-grade strider talismans to the 2 of them before he said, it's really not safe to stay in the Grand Myriad Mountains any longer. Quickly head over to the ancient battlefield. After she caught those 4 talismans in her hands, Lui Weii was stunned. The Northern Territory naturally had talismans as well, and it wasn't really valuable to her. However, it was different when the talismans were of the high grade. Even she found it very difficult to obtain high-grade talismans. However, Yang Yi had casually tossed 4 high-grade talismans to them. After she glanced at the 4 talismans in her hand with a complicated expression, Lui Weii sighed and said, Brother Yang, will you really not give it any more consideration? She really didn't want to give up. Because if Yang Yi joined the Heavenly Sword Sect with the potential and natural talent he possessed, then it would be good for both the sect and Yang Yi. Yang Yi shook his head and refused once more. If he'd rescued his mother, then perhaps he would take his mother to another territory with him. However, his mother was still confined in the Flower Palace, so he would absolutely not head to another territory. A wisp of disappointment flashed through her eyes when she saw Yang Yi refuse once more, and then she said, no matter what, I still hope that Brother Yang can reconsider. If Brother Yang comes around in the future and is willing to head to the Northern Territory, then you can come looking for me at the ancient battlefield. Yang Yi smiled and didn't refuse again. Yang Yi, you're heading to the ancient battlefield as well. Since it's like that, then let's go together. Meanwhile, Yen spoke abruptly. Lui Weii gazed at him as well. Yang Yi glanced at Leng Jun, who was still twitching on the ground, and then he shook his head and said, both of you go on first. I still have matters to deal with. Lui Weii nodded and said, then we'll meet at the ancient battlefield. All right, said Yang Yi with a smile on his face. After Lui Weii and Yen left, Yang Yi turned around to gaze at Leng Jun, who was still twitching on the ground. At this moment, even though Leng Jun's body was still twitching, his eyes were open. However, his eyes were filled with resentment and strong fear. Obviously, he wished for nothing more than to eat Yang Ye's flesh and drink Yang Ye's blood right now. Yang Yi disregarded Leng Jun's resentful gaze and said indifferently, I presume you are clearly aware of the situation you're in now. I'll get straight to the point. Tell me everything that you know. Don't hold back or lie, because living would become worse than death for you if you do that. Leng Jun spoke in a hoarse voice. Would you give me a swift end if talk? Give you a swift end? The corners of Yang Ye's mouth raised slightly to reveal slight ridicule. He said, if you wanted to die, then why didn't you bite your tongue and take your own life? Or directly detonate your dantian? Since you don't want to die, then don't put on an act in front of me. Tell me everything you know. As for whether you die or not, that'll depend entirely on your performance. Leng Jun fell silent. He naturally didn't want to die. Otherwise, he should have taken his life at the instant that he was trapped by the violet mink. However, he hadn't done that. In other words, he wanted to live. However, he knew that if he wanted to live, it would be equivalent to betraying the League, and it was actually equivalent to death as well. The only difference was when death arrived. If it came later, then it meant that he had another period of time to live. When he thought up to here, Leng Jun closed his eyes slowly, and then he said, what do you want to know? The corners of Yang Ye's eyes twitched when he heard this, and then he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Even though he'd said that Leng Jun was afraid of death, his intuition told him that this assassin wasn't afraid of death, and there ought to be a special reason why this assassin was acting in this way. Of course, he wasn't interested to find out what the special reason was, because so long as this assassin didn't take his own life, then it would be equivalent to Yang Yi possessed a new lackey that was an extraordinary assassin. After 15 minutes passed, Yang Ye's expression had turned unsightly when he finished listening to Leng Jun, because he found out that these three assassins who'd come for his life this time weren't sent by the Origin School, Ghost Sect, or the Flower Palace, and it was the Sword Sect instead. Even though Yang Yi didn't have even the slightest good impression of the Sword Sect, he'd still done a great deal for the Sword Sect out of consideration for Su Qingshi. However, not only did the Sword Sect not free grateful, it even had the intent to kill him on many occasions. This time, it had even directly dispatched assassins to take his life. The Sword Sect. Yang Yi took a deep breath while his eyes were filled with an icy cold expression. This time, he'd placed the Sword Sect and the Flower Palace at a similar position in his perception. Right at this moment, Leng Jun suddenly said while he laid on the ground, "What are you going to do with me?" Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, gazed at Leng Jun, and then said, "My intuition tells me that you probably aren't one that fears death." Leng Jun revealed a miserable smile while his eyes were filled with a savage expression. He said, "My enemies are still alive, so how could I die?" "Enemies?" said Yang Yi with a frown on his face. Leng Jun knew that his fate was in Yang Ye's hands, so he didn't dare to be hostile and arrogant towards Yang Yi. He immediately said in a low voice, "Perhaps you don't know how the League of Doom fosters assassins. Allow me to tell you how they do it. They start fostering assassins from a young age. In other words, they especially look for children below the age of 10 to foster. They search throughout the world for children with a good natural endowment, and so long as they find one, they definitely take the child with them and start fostering the child from a young age. Moreover, for the sake of making these children become utter tools of assassinations, they force these children to kill the people closest to them with their own two hands. They make the children kill the people closest to them?" Yang Ye's expression changed slightly. "Isn't the League of Doom a little too perverted?" Leng Jun said with a savage expression on his face, "That's nothing. For the sake of controlling these future top-rate assassins, they give these children a lethal poison from a young age. This lethal poison won't take our lives. However, living will be worse than death for us if we're unable to obtain the antidote every single month. It will be just like how it was for me earlier. So, in that way, you're suffering from a toxic poison right now?" Yang Yi frowned as he asked this question. He wasn't interested at all in this person's sad and miserable life. Yang Yi only cared about a single thing, and it was whether this assassin could become an extraordinary goon that was under his command. "Yes." Leng Jun didn't conceal it. "If it's like that, then you're completely worthless, huh?" said Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. He would naturally not feel any pity towards an enemy. Even though this fellow's life was extremely tragic, he was still Yang Ye's enemy. Since it was an enemy, then it was best that his life was tragic, and it was even to the extent that Yang Yi would make his life a worse tragedy. Throughout these years, Yang Yi had understood a principle. One could have empathy, but one shouldn't extend such feelings to one's enemies, because kindness to one's enemies was cruelty to one's self. Yang Yi was absolutely not do something stupid like rescuing someone only to be backstabbed right after. Leng Jun's eyelids twitched. "Did I say all of that for nothing?" Yes, the reason he'd said all of that was because he hoped to obtain Yang Ye's pity. So long as Yang Yi pitied him, then he just had to sacrifice something or even his freedom, and then surviving wouldn't be difficult at all. But now, not only did Yang Yi feel no pity towards him at all, Yang Yi wanted to kill him because he had no value anymore. Is he still human? Is he still a human being? Yang Yi said indifferently, "Give me a reason not to kill you. Otherwise, you can take your own life. Is a dead person useful to you?" Leng Jun said, "If you're able to dispel the poison for me, then it represents that you can do the same for the other assassins. In that way, I can contact other assassins to work for you. Yang Yi was slightly tempted. He'd personally experienced the skill of these King Realm assassins. If he was able to take control of a group formed from mysterious assassins, then it would undoubtedly be an extremely good thing for him. All of you are being controlled by the League of Doom. However, if all of you come to work under me, I'll be utilizing a similar method to take control of all of you as well. If that's the case, would all of you still be willing? Asked Yang Yi. Yes. Leng Jun didn't hesitate at all and said, all of US members of the League of Doom can be said to have irreconcilable enmity with the League. If it wasn't for the poison, I believe that at least 80% or more assassins would betray the League. If you're able to dispel the poison that plagues them, then I guarantee that they'll definitely be willing to be controlled by you. After a short moment, Yang Yi shook his head and said, all of this is established on the foundation that I can dispel the poison for all of you. However, do you think I can? Even though I don't know what sort of poison all of you are suffering from, since the League of Doom utilized it to take control of the assassins under its command, then I presume it isn't just trash. Leng Jun fell silent when he heard this. Yes, just as Yang Yi said, the conditions he spoke of were established upon Yang Ye's ability to dispel the poison within their bodies. If Yang Yi was unable to accomplish that, then everything was just wishful thinking. Right at this moment, the violet mink on Yang Ye's shoulder had suddenly flashed and arrived in front of him, and then it started waving its little claws. You're saying that you can do it? Yang Yi was astounded. The violet mink shook its little head, and then it rubbed Yang Ye's stomach as if it was saying that mysterious vortex can. Yang Ye's eyes lit up. Right, how could I have forgotten the mysterious tiny vortex? Since I noticed the tiny vortex until now, there seems to have been nothing that the tiny vortex couldn't accomplish. So, dispelling poison shouldn't be difficult for the mysterious tiny vortex, right? When he thought up to here, Yang Yi gazed at Leng Jun and said, what poison are you inflicted with? Leng Jun shook his head and said, I don't know as well. In any case, it was placed in our bodies from a very young age. Now, our blood, meridians, and skin ought to have poison within them. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched when he heard this. The League of Doom really is perverted. It actually utilized such a method to control these assassins. Of course, there was even more pleasant surprise in his heart. Because if the tiny vortex could dispel the poison, then it represented that it was very likely for the assassins of the League of Doom to belong to him, Yang Yi. If he had the assistance of this group of assassins, then Yang Yi would have even more confidence in his ability to face the Flower Palace or any other power. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts before he walked slowly towards Leng Jun, and then he stretched out his hand and placed it on Leng Jun's shoulder. After that, his consciousness entered Leng Jun's body to investigate the situation within Leng Jun's body. He was naturally not afraid of Leng Jun playing any tricks. After all, a strand of Leng Jun's soul was still in his possession. Thus, so long as Leng Jun wasn't an utter idiot, then Leng Jun wouldn't play any tricks at a time like this. At the moment that Yang Yi touched Leng Jun's arm, a wisp of a cold glow instantly flashed in Leng Jun's eyes. But in next to no time, that strand of a cold glow had vanished. Indeed, that instant just now was the best opportunity to kill Yang Yi. However, he'd given it up in the end, and the reason was none other than because he wasn't confident in his ability to kill Yang Yi. Based on the understanding of Yang Yi that he'd obtained during this period, he knew that since Yang Yi dared to come close to him like this while not taking any precautions, then Yang Yi definitely had a method to protect himself. On the other hand, once he failed to kill Yang Yi, then endless torture and pain would be waiting for him. He truly didn't want to experience that pain from before that came from the depths of his soul. Since Yang Yi dared to come so close to this assassin, he naturally had a way to protect his life, and it was naturally the little fellow. If this fellow before him arouse any hostile intentions towards him or make a move against him, then the little fellow would toss a strand of violet light over at the first possible moment. Was the attack speed of this assassin faster than the little fellow? The answer was an absolute no. After a short while, Yang Ye's expression had become completely solemn, because he noticed that the poison Leng Jun suffered from was much more terrifying than he'd imagined. It wasn't just within Leng Jun's body, It should be said that Lang Jun's entire body was inflicted by the toxic poison, and Lang Jun could be described as a person that was full of poison. What sort of poison is this? Yang Yi withdrew his hand, and then he gazed at Lang Jun as he spoke with a solemn expression. Lang Jun laughed bitterly and shook his head as he said, I don't know. I'd looked for some alchemists and toxicologists in the past, but not even one knew what sort of poison this was. Besides the antidote, the only other ways to eliminate this poison is to seek the assistance of a monarch realm expert, or become a monarch realm expert myself. You're saying that even exalt realm experts are unable to eliminate this poison? Said Yang Yi in a low voice. It's not that they're impossible to eliminate it. Lang Jun shook his head and said, If I'd just been inflicted with this poison, then the strength of an exalt realm expert should be sufficient to dispel it without encountering much difficulty. However, the problem is that we've been suffering from it since a young age. At this point in time, the poison has already fused into one with our bodies. So, it's probably impossible to dispel even if we attain the exalt realm. The League of Doom really is ruthless, Yang Yi said in a light voice. In this way, all of you'll be eternally in their control unless all of you attain the monarch realm. The monarch realm? Lang Jun laughed with self-ridicule and said, We'll probably never be able to attain the monarch realm in our entire lives, or even if we're able, but would they allow us to become monarch realm experts and escape their control? Yang Yi shook his head and didn't answer Lang Jun. At this moment, he was thinking of a method to deal with the poison in Lang Jun's body. He had no doubt that if he'd been inflicted by this poison, then the tiny vortex would definitely be able to dispel it with ease even if the poison had seeped deep into his bones. However, the problem was that the poison wasn't in his body but the body of another. So, he had a problem. The tiny vortex was within his body, so it would lend a hand when his life was threatened. However, it was impossible to make the tiny vortex help on its own. Just like this very moment, Yang Yi had asked countless times for the tiny vortex's help, but it didn't display any reaction at all. In other words, it was impossible for him to get the tiny vortex to help. If the tiny vortex didn't help, then Lang Jun would definitely die. Dejection slowly crept into Lang Jun's eyes when he saw Yang Yi remain silent. After a short while, he said in a low voice, You ought to be clearly aware that there's another assassin in the shadows that's waiting for his chance to assassinate you. I can help you deal with him. What's your condition? Asked Yang Yi with an indifferent tone. Let me leave, Lang Jun said. Even though I don't know what you've done to me, I know that if you want to kill me, then it would probably require a single thought from you. Moreover, I'm more useful to you while I'm alive, because the person I want to kill is the person who gave the order to assassinate you. How confident are you in your ability to kill that person? Asked Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. I have no confidence at all. Lang Jun said, I've told you about it earlier. No matter if it's the Earth Assassins, Blood Assassins, or Heaven Assassins, there's an Exalt Assassin amongst them. What's an Exalt Assassin? It's one that has never failed. Even though he's at the King Realm as well, the gap between us is huge. In other words, you're just courting death? Said Yang Yi. Lang Jun said, But it's better than dying meaninglessly at your hands. If I try to kill him, then even if I die, I would be considered to have tried to avenge my loved ones, right? Yang Yi fell silent. He naturally didn't care about Lang Jun's fate, and he merely cared about whether he could get an assassin as his subordinate. Moreover, it was even an elite assassin. He truly didn't wish to give up such an opportunity. After a short while, Yang Yi said, I might have a method to dispel the poison for you. However, the process will probably be slightly painful. You can dispel the poison? Lang Jun suddenly raised his head to gaze at Yang Yi, while his eyes were filled with excitement. What did this mean? It meant that he could escape the League of Doom's control in the future, and it represented that he could disregard the poison that once plagued him and make a move against the members of the League of Doom. In other words, he could take revenge for his loved ones. I can't be certain that it'll succeed, but we should give it a try, right? Said Yang Yi. Of course. Lang Jun naturally wouldn't refuse. Even if it was only a shred of hope, he still didn't want to give up on it. Yang Yi nodded. With a flick of his finger, a strand of ghastly while flame appeared on his palm, and the temperature in the surroundings instantly rose when this strand of white flame appeared. Lung Jun's pupils constricted violently when he saw this strand of ghastly white flame because he was able to sense how terrifying the energy within the flame was. My method is to send this flame into your body and circulate it through the meridians within your body. We'll be utilizing the high temperature of the flame to incinerate the poison within your body. Of course, I'm not confident that it will succeed, and the slightest mistake might transform you into a pile of ash. Yang Yi spoke casually. Of course, if it succeeds, then you'll gain new life and escape the control of your enemies. Do I have a choice? Lung Jun laughed bitterly. If he chose to refuse, then this fellow before him would probably kill him on the spot. Yang Yi smiled. Lung Jun was right, he didn't have a choice at all. Because if he chose to refuse, then Yang Yi wouldn't hesitate to annihilate him on the spot. Since Lung Jun couldn't be of use to him and was his enemy, he felt that it was best that Lung Jun was dead. With a flick of his finger, the nether ghost flame directly entered Lung Jun's body. In an instant, a grievous shrill cry resounded, and it shot into the sky. If he knew the flame was so terrifying, then Lung Jun wouldn't have agreed to it no matter what, because it was truly too painful. How should this pain be described? One could say that it was like being roasted by a ball of flames. Moreover, it was like being roasted from inside out. Most importantly, he was still fully conscious. Now, he finally knew that when the pain from this flame was compared to the pain he suffered from the poison in the past, the pain from the poison was simply like child's play. Yang Yi frowned as he gazed at Lung Jun, who was shivering on the ground, and he said, "Can you be a little more composer? You're a King Realm expert at any rate, so you shouldn't make such an embarrassing display, right? Isn't it just a ball of flames?" Lung Jun was almost angered to the point of falling unconscious when he heard this. What do you mean by it's just a ball of flames? How can you speak so heartlessly? Yang Yi didn't care about the pain Lung Jun felt. He controlled the nether ghost flames to flow incessantly through Lung Jun's body. For the sake of keeping this extraordinary goon of his alive, Yang Yi was very serious. He had no choice because the slightest mistake would probably cause Lung Jun to be instantly evaporated into thin air. If Lung Jun died, then his future group of extraordinary assassins would be gone. 15 minutes later, numerous beads of sweat had appeared on Yang Ye's face. However, he revealed slight happiness from his eyes, because he noticed that the nether ghost flame was effective against the poison within Lung Jun's body. Everywhere the nether ghost flame passed, the poison within Lung Jun's meridians and blood would be instantly evaporated and transform into nothingness. In other words, it was only a matter of time now. After around an hour passed, Yang Yi gestured with his hand and the strand of ghastly white flame emerged from Lung Jun's body and flew into his palm. After he put the nether ghost flame away, Yang Yi gazed at Lung Jun and said indifferently, 90% of the poison within your body is gone, and the remaining bit of poison within your body will be unable to affect you at all. You ought to know what you should do if you want the remaining poison to be eliminated. Lung Jun closed his eyes slightly and sensed the condition of his body. After a short while, he opened his eyes while a wisp of wild joy appeared in his eyes. But in next to no time, Lung Jun calmed down because while the poison had been eliminated, he had another problem before him. A King Realm expert like him was naturally unwilling to obey the orders of a profounder at the First Heaven Realm. However, he knew that if he tried to flee or try anything at this moment, then the consequences would be extremely horrifying. In next to no time, he thought of a method, and it was to agree for now. Yang Yi grunted coldly when he saw Lung Jun remain silent. With a command in his heart, a strand of sword intent shot towards that strand of Lung Jun's soul. In an instant, another shrill cry suddenly resounded. Lung Jun instantly fell to the ground while his feature had instantly warped. "Stay your hand. I'm willing to submit to you." Lung Jun forcefully endured the pain that came from the depths of his soul, and he begged for mercy in a hoarse voice. Yang Yi said indifferently, "Don't challenge my patience. If you do that again, then I would rather torture you to death than keep you alive. You can feel free to try if you don't believe me. No, it won't happen again. This time, Leng Jun was speaking sincerely, because he noticed that Yang Yi hadn't done anything, yet he'd suffered such pain. In other words, Yang Yi had definitely executed some sort of mysterious technique against him, and this technique was even more terrifying than the poison. Ha ha! Right at this moment, Leng Yin suddenly appeared here. His face was covered in an expression of ridicule and mocking as he gazed at Leng Jun, who was begging for mercy on the ground, and he said, I truly never expected that you Leng Jun would actually be reduced to such a state. I truly never expected this. Ha ha! As he gazed at Leng Yin, who'd made a sudden appearance here, a wisp of ridicule flashed through Leng Jun's eyes. This idiot actually dared to appear fearless before us because he thinks his movement technique is mysterious and unfathomable. What's it like to court death? What's it like to be an idiot? Leng Yin is both. Yang Yi was stunned as well because he hadn't expected that Leng Yin would actually appear openly before him. What does this fellow intend to do? Leng Yin glanced at Yang Yi before he gazed at Leng Jun, who laid on the ground. As for the violet mink on Yang Ye's shoulder, he directly disregarded it. Tisk, tsk. Leng Jun, I truly never imagined that you would actually be reduced to such a state when facing a profounder at the first heaven realm. Tsk. Tsk. You're even begging for mercy from him. I truly didn't expect that even you, Leng Jun, would be reduced to such a state one day. Leng Yin gazed at Leng Jun while he shook his head and spoke slowly. He naturally didn't take Yang Yi serious because if he wanted to leave, then not to mention a profounder at the first heaven realm, even a spirit realm expert who could form wings with profound energy would be unable to catch up to him. Did he have to care about a tiny profounder at the first heaven realm when he possessed that mysterious movement technique? The answer was no. Yang Yi didn't make a move. On the contrary, he gazed with interest at this assassin who had made a sudden appearance here. The heavens really are too kind to me. I just finished subduing an extraordinary goon and it has sent me another. Leng Jun glanced at Leng Yin as if he was looking at a moron, and then he said, Leng Yin, I merely thought that you were brave but not astute in the past. But now it would seem like even that is a form of praise to you. You're simply an extraordinarily huge idiot. You simply have the brain of a pig. Our strengths are almost on par, yet I've been reduced to such a state now. Could it be that you didn't consider the reason for this? If I were you, I would have turned around and fled at the first possible moment, yet you showed yourself recklessly. Saying that you have the brain of a pig is an insult to pigs. Leng Yin's expression changed when he heard this. Right, why didn't I think of this? Leng Jun's strength is definitely stronger than my own, yet why has he been reduced to such a state? When he thought up to here, he turned to gaze at Yang Yi, who was gazing at him with a mocking expression, and his heart shook. What sort of gaze is that? When he noticed that the situation was bad, Leng Yin's figure flashed, and he intended to retreat. However, it was already too late. A violet barrier of light had suddenly appeared around him. Leng Jun instantly seemed to take pleasure in Leng Yin's misfortune when he saw the violet barrier of light. I finally have a companion now. Leng Yin cried out in his heart when he saw the violet barrier of light. Shit. He didn't hesitate at all to swing his palm at the barrier of light. However, it didn't move at all. And right when he was about to continue attacking, a strand of violet light had suddenly appeared in front of him. Bang! Leng Yin was blasted flying. Continue. Right? Leave him on the verge of death, said Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. This assassin before him, Leng Yin, was clearly a rebellious fellow. So Yang Yi felt that he had to pull out Leng Yin's teeth before he had a discussion with Leng Yin. The violet mink swung out another few dozen strands of violet light under Yang Ye's orders. Fortunately, the violet mink controlled the strength of the violet light, and these strands of violet light could only cause pain but not death to Leng Yin. Even though it was like that, it was still torture to Leng Yin. After an hour had passed, Leng Yin was on the verge of death, and he was in an even more miserable state than the state Leng Jun had been in just now. Yang Yi didn't waste his breath at all, nor did he ask for Leng Yin's opinion. He directly asked the violet mink to extract a strand of Leng Yin's soul. Because Huang Yen was aware during this process. The pain from the extraction of his soul caused Huang Yen to fall unconscious. And this scene caused Lang Jun's body to tremble. After half an hour passed, Huang Yen regained his consciousness. When he saw Yang Yi, a savage expression and killing intent had instantly appeared in Lang Yin's eyes. Yang Yi grunted coldly when he saw Lang Yin's expression, and then he withdrew a high-grade talisman and slapped it onto Lang Yen before he said, "Continue blasting him, Lang Jun." The violet mink would naturally not refuse. It waved its little claw, and then over 10 strands of violet light instantly blasted onto Lang Yen before he fainted once more. 15 minutes later, Lang Yen woke up from the effect of Yang Ye's healing talisman. A ferocious glow immediately arose in his eyes when he saw Yang Yi, and he even intended to attack. "Continue blasting him. Continue." 2 hours later, Lang Yen woke up again. This time, he didn't reveal a ferocious glow in his eyes upon catching sight of Yang Yi. There was only deep fear and reverence in his eyes. However, Yang Yi seemed to have become accustomed to giving the command, and he didn't hesitate at all upon seeing Lang Yen wake up. "Continue." As he spoke, he slapped another high-grade healing talisman onto Lang Yen. He had a bunch of talismans, so he could do as he liked. So, the poor Lang Yen's fate was tragic. 15 minutes later, Lang Yen woke up once more. This time, the first thing he said after he opened his eyes was, "I admit defeat." This caused Yang Yi, who was about to give the order again, to be stunned. He actually admitted defeat. However, right at this moment, over 10 strands of violet light blasted at his body once more. At the instant before he fell unconscious, Lang Yen howled with sorrow in his heart. "I fucking admitted defeat. What else do you want? I already admitted defeat. Big brother. I admitted defeat. Even if you want to kill me, just give me a swift death, alright? Alright?" Yang Yi was stunned as well because he hadn't given the order. Yang Yi gazed at the violet mink, and the violet mink blinked before it shrugged in response. It seemed to be saying that it had gotten used to doing that. Both Yang Yi and Ling Jun were speechless, and their gazes towards Lang Yen were filled with pity. He really suffered such a tragic fate. After another 15 minutes passed, Lang Yen woke up once more. This time, he didn't gaze at Yang Yi but at the violet mink instead, and his eyes were filled with fear and horror as he gazed at this tiny fellow before him. If he knew that this mysterious king-rank dark beast was so terrifying, then he wouldn't have shown himself no matter what. However, it was too late for all of that. "Do you want to live or die?" Yang Yi said frankly. "If you want to live, then you ought to know what you must do. If you want to die, then take your own life. I'll absolutely not stop you." The corners of Lang Yen's mouth twitched. "Take my own life." No one wanted to die. Even ants wanted to drag out their insignificant existence, let alone humans. Lang Yen naturally chose to live, and this choice made Yang Yi very happy. Of course, he wasn't happy that Lang Yen could live, and he was happy because he got another extraordinary assassin to fight for him. So, no matter if it was against the disciples from the 6 great powers or the monstrous geniuses of the other territories, he had another trump card to be used during his trip to the ancient battlefield. After he found out that Yang Yi could help him dispel the poison, the resistance Lang Yen had towards Yang Yi had instantly vanished greatly. Even though he would be under Yang Ye's control once the poison was dispelled, it was much better than being controlled by his enemies. Moreover, from this day onward, he could fully escape the League of Doom, and he could even make a move against the League. "I want to return to the Southern Territory." Right at this moment, Ling Jun spoke abruptly. Yang Yi frowned and said, "Why?" Because he wanted to bring the two of them to the ancient battlefield with him. Ling Jun said in a low voice, "There are numerous assassins like Lang Yen and me at the Southern Territory. Of course, their strengths aren't as formidable as us, and it's even to the extent that many are merely at the mortal realm and first heaven realm. However, their potential is extremely great. If you're able to dispel the poison for them, then they'll definitely be willing to serve you. In this way, we wouldn't just be able to obtain even more help, we would even be able to weaken the overall strength of the League of Doom. How confident are you in your ability to make them come to me?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. Over 90%, Leng Jun said in a low voice. All of them have irreconcilable enmity with the League of Doom. They will definitely not refuse if they're able to escape the League's control. However, in this way, it's very likely that we'll become targets of the League. It's even to the extent that the League might dispatch Earth assassins who are spirit realm experts to kill us. That doesn't matter, Yang Yi said. In any case, they can't enter the ancient battlefield, and they can't make a move against us even if they do. So, you've agreed? Asked Leng Jun. Of course. Yang Yi smiled and said, both you and Leng Yin can return to the Southern Territory. Try your best to find those assassins of the League, and then bring them to me at the ancient battlefield. It's probably not difficult for all of you to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains and head to the ancient battlefield with the movement technique all of you possess. So long as you've entered the ancient battlefield, I'll naturally be able to find the two of you. Meanwhile, Leng Yin suddenly said, aren't you afraid that we would flee? Yang Yi replied with a question, would the two of you even dare? Leng Yin grunted coldly and said, why not? Could it be that you would be able to find us once we've gone far from you and that mysterious king-rank dark beast? Yang Yi smiled and said, feel free to give it a try. Leng Yin fell silent. Earlier, he still held a trace of hope that Yang Ye's method of control required a certain level of with them. In other words, Yang Yi could only keep them under his control while they were by Yang Ye's side. But Yang Ye's attitude right now allowed him to realize that the method Yang Yi utilized to take control of them wasn't restricted by distance at all. When they thought up to here, a wisp of sorrow flashed in the eyes of Leng Jun and Leng Yin. They didn't want to die, but they didn't want their freedom to be in the hands of another as well. Just think about it. How could anyone be truly willing to fight on another's behalf? However, they had no choice now. As if he knew what they were thinking, Yang Yi hesitated for a moment before he said, I only need both of you by my side for 10 years, and I'll return your freedom to you after that time. 10 years were enough for him, because he was confident that he didn't need anyone to fight on his behalf after 10 years had passed. Leng Yin and Leng Jun had both swiftly raised their heads to look at Shan Shi when they heard this, and they said with excitement, really? Of course. Yang Yi said, since I said it's for 10 years, then it's 10 years. Of course, if both of you only pretend to obey my orders or make me feel dissatisfied during these 10 years of time, then there'll be no need to wait for those 10 years of time because I'll make you vanish from the world right away. We absolutely won't, they hurriedly guaranteed. Perhaps 10 years was an extremely long period of time for an ordinary person, but it was only a blink of the eye to profounders. Leng Jun and Leng Yin had left. Yang Yi was naturally not worried about them fleeing or arousing other ill intent when a strand of their souls was in his possession. Because even if they were extremely far away from each other, he merely had to issue a single command in his heart and living would be worse than death to them. So, he was entirely not worried that they would play any tricks or refuse to return. On the Lightning Eagle, Yang Ye's thoughts drifted as he gazed at the dense forest and mountains that were ceaselessly shrinking in his gaze. Since he'd dealt with the surprise attacks of the assassins, he naturally didn't have to continue heading to the ancient battlefield on foot. Even Yang Yi felt slight anticipation towards the ancient battlefield. After all the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent would be gathered there. Regardless of whether it was quality or quantity, the monstrous geniuses here weren't existences that the geniuses who participated in the Ascension rankings could compare to. Yang Yi wanted to see the monstrous geniuses of the other territories, and he wanted to see exactly how great the gap between him and them was. Of course, he hadn't forgotten the reason he'd come to the ancient battlefield. Improving his strength was his main objective. After a few confrontations with the Flower Palace, Yang Yi had deeply understood a single principle, and it was that his strength was truly too weak. Not to mention going against the Flower Palace. If it wasn't for the Talisman Masters Association and the founding emperor of the Grand Qin Empire, he would have probably died a long time ago. He had the protection of the Talisman Masters Association and the founding emperor in the past, but what about the future? Could it continue placing his hopes on others in the future? The answer was no. So, if he wanted to rescue his mother, then he had to rely on himself. However, he felt a deep feeling of powerlessness whenever he thought about the colossus which was the Flower Palace. No matter how extraordinary his potential was or how monstrous his natural talent was, he was merely an ant in the eyes of the Flower Palace right now. He could only rescue his mother by utilizing strategy and wits but not force. This was a fact that Huang Yi had just understood. Even such a colossus like the Flower Palace had its enemies like the Grand Qin Empire and various other enemies that he was unaware of. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If he wanted to deal with the Flower Palace, then the only way was to gather these powers that were hostile towards the Flower Palace. Of course, he had to possess a power of his own as well. So, that was the reason why he'd chosen to expose the Nether Ghost Flame and help dispel the poison within both Lang Jun and Lang Yin. If they were able to bring even more assassins to him, then coupled with the king-rank dark beasts he possessed, he would be slightly more confident in his ability to go against the Flower Palace in the future. If he wanted to subdue even more dark beasts, then the only way was to improve his cultivation and allow the tiny vortex to enlarge swiftly. So, during the following period of time, Huang Yi started to cultivate madly. He had no lack of energy stones, and he even had some top-grade energy stones so he could cultivate without worrying about anything. After he consumed almost 10,000 energy stones, Huang Yi had finally advanced, and he'd advanced by 2 ranks in succession to attain the peak of the First Heaven Realm's 9th rank. Now, he merely lacked a critical factor in order to enter into the King Realm. On the other hand, if he lacked this critical factor, then it would probably be impossible for him to advance even if he consumed 10,000 energy stones. So, Huang Yi could only temporarily put his intentions to advance into the King Realm aside. Huang Yi opened his eyes on the lightning eagle, and then he rose his head slightly and gazed towards the azure sky and white clouds in the distance. After that, he took a deep breath while shock that couldn't be concealed appeared in his eyes. Merely around 10 days had passed since he'd started absorbing the energy within the energy stones, and it was exactly this short period of time that allowed him to advance from the 7th rank of the First Heaven Realm into the peak of the First Heaven Realm's 9th rank. He'd directly advanced by 2 ranks in just 10 days of time. Isn't such speed a little too fast? Huang Yi was naturally clearly aware that the speed of his advancement was definitely related to the tiny vortex, and it was exactly the reason why Huang Yi was deeply shocked. Exactly what is the background of the tiny vortex? Where exactly did it come from? Since I've noticed the tiny vortex until now, it seems to be all-powerful and it seems like there's nothing it can't deal with. Even the Nether Ghost Flame wasn't able to resist the tiny vortex at all. Besides that, Elder Mu, who possesses unfathomable strength, and those other peak figures like Taoist Zue and the founding emperor were actually unable to notice the tiny vortex that resides within me. What exactly is the tiny vortex? Why does it possess such terrifying ability? What other abilities of it have I not discovered yet? Of course, the most important question is why is it in my possession? Huang Yi laughed bitterly as he shook his head. It wasn't that he'd never thought about all of this in the past, and it was instead because he was unable to come to any conclusion every single time that he thought about it. This time was the same as well. So, as he always said, it was fine so long as the tiny vortex didn't harm him. After he straightened out his thoughts, Huang Yi stood up and issued a summon in his heart. A strand of violet light flashed before the violet mink appeared in front of him. "Little fellow, do you have other abilities?" asked Huang Yi. Every single time the little fellow's cultivation advanced, it would obtain some new abilities, and that was the reason why Huang Yi had asked such a question. The violet mink blinked, thought for a moment, and then its eyes suddenly lit up. After that, it waved its little claw at Huang Yi. No violet light flashed, or it should be said that nothing seemed to have happened at all. However, Huang Yi was directly stunned on the spot, because he noticed to his shock that the hidden sword in his hand and the spatial rings that he wore had vanished. Huang Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva and said, "Little fellow, what did you do to them?" The violet mink blinked, and then it waved its claw once more. The hidden sword and the spatial rings instantly appeared in front of Huang Yi, and Huang Yi was stunned once more when he saw them appear out of thin air, because he'd been utterly unable to notice exactly how they'd appeared there. If the culprit wasn't right before him, He would absolutely not believe that something like this was actually possible. Because no matter if it was the hidden sword or the spatial rings, there was a trace of his spiritual brand on them. However, Huang Yi had clearly sensed the spiritual brand vanish at the instant that they vanished. Isn't this a little too terrifying? If the little fellow is with someone else and does this to me, then... When he thought up to here, Huang Yi couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. What other new abilities do you possess? Huang Yi suppressed the shock in his heart and continued. The violet mink thought for a moment, and then it wasn't long before it started waving its little claw again. This time, a violet-colored energy sword appeared in front of Huang Yi. And then the little fellow waved its claws swiftly under Huang Ye's astonished gaze, causing an extremely strange scene to appear here. The violet energy sword was originally in front of Huang Yi. However, along with a wave of the little fellow's claw, it appeared behind Huang Yi in the next moment. After that, another swing of its claw caused the sword to directly appear above Huang Yi. The next swing made it appear on Huang Ye's left. Just like this, the violet energy sword constantly changed positions, and it caused Huang Ye's jaw to hit the ground. Huang Yi had always thought that his sword control technique was extremely mysterious and swift, but when it was compared to this technique of the little fellows, he finally noticed that his sword control technique was simply weak to the extreme. If it was a comparison of speed, then the little fellow's technique completely crushed the sword control technique's speed. If it was a comparison of strength, then the sword control technique's might was utterly inferior to the violet energy sword unless it was enhanced by sword intent. Of course, the most terrifying part about this ability was the energy swords that could appear out of nowhere because they were truly impossible to take precautions against. Perhaps even Yuan Tong would have an extreme headache if he had to deal with such energy swords. Right at this moment, the violet mink started waving its little claws again, and then almost 100 violet energy swords appeared in front of Huang Yi. After that, they started to flutter about in the sky while Huang Yi watched with a dumbstruck expression. Moreover, the scene of 100 energy swords flickering about in the sky was simply... A chill ran down Huang Ye's spine. The violet mink seemed to be enjoying it too much, and it ceaselessly waved its little claws about. Moreover, as it waved its claws about, the 100 energy swords in the sky started to form all sorts of strange sword formations. Of course, the most important point was that it was impossible to track these energy swords. For example, they'd formed a square-shaped sword formation earlier, but they would instantly transform into a round-shaped sword formation in the next moment. Yes, it was a direct transformation, and there was no process to it at all. Huang Yi knew that the little fellow was copying the sword formations of his sword chest, and if its might was disregarded, then this shocking method of attack was utterly superior to the sword formation of his sword chest. The shocking speed at which it transformed and moved at was probably something that even spirit realm experts were unable to avoid. As expected of the spatial mink clan of the demon territory. Even though you're still at a juvenile stage, you already possess such shocking spatial techniques. Right at this moment, a sigh suddenly resounded from above the lightning eagle. Huang Ye's expression changed. Someone has actually arrived here. And the violet mink was actually unable to notice this person's appearance. Such strength is... When he thought up to here, Huang Yi seemed as if he was up against a great enemy, and the sword chest appeared in his hand with a flip of his palm. At the same time, the profound energy within his body started surging violently. At this moment, the violet mink had stopped waving its claws, and it blinked incessantly as it gazed towards the surroundings as if it was saying, "Why can't I notice this person?" Right at this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared on the lightning eagle. Huang Yi instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this middle-aged man because it was none other than that middle-aged man who'd given him a command token that day and asked him to visit the Dark Beast Empire when he was free. Right at this moment, the 100 violet energy swords in the air had suddenly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, they'd already appeared in front of the middle-aged man. Obviously, the little fellow had launched an attack because the middle-aged man's sudden appearance had displeased the little fellow. Huang Yi was instantly alarmed in his heart when he witnessed this scene. Right when he was about to act, the middle-aged man grinned and said, "Stop!" As soon as the middle-aged man's voice escaped his lips, the 100 energy swords had suddenly and strangely stopped in midair as if time had stopped. The violet mink's eyes opened wide as it stared fixedly at the middle-aged man who stood before it. Obviously, it was shocked by this middle-aged man's abilities. Yang Yi was shocked as well. In the past, he was aware that this mysterious middle-aged man's strength was extremely formidable, but he'd never imagined that this middle-aged man's strength would actually be terrifying to such an extent. Because the middle-aged man hadn't done anything from the beginning, and he'd just spoken the word "stop" in a flat tone. After that, the 100 terrifying violet energy swords that were controlled by the little fellow had been stopped just like that. What sort of ability is this? Exactly what sort of strength does this middle-aged man possess? Is he at the Exalt realm? Or perhaps the Monarch realm? Yang Yi suppressed the shock and questions in his heart as he said, "Senior, we meet again." The middle-aged man grinned, and then the energy swords in front of him vanished directly as if they'd never been there. This caused Yang Yi to be even more shocked. Yang Yi said in his heart, "This middle-aged man's strength is definitely not inferior to Taoist Zui and the founding emperor." A wisp of surprise flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes as he gazed at Yang Yi. And then he said, "Fourth level sword intent. The peak of the first heaven realm's 9th rank. A physical body that's on par with the spirit rank dark beast, and even the enlightened sword heart. Human kid, you've really surprised me." Yang Yi shook his head and didn't reply to this. He said instead, "I wonder why Senior has come here this time? To meet it." The middle-aged man gazed at the violet mink while a wisp of a complicated expression flashed through his eyes. He said, "As expected of one that's favored by the heavens. You're already halfway into the spirit rank at such a young age, and you even possess such mysterious innate spatial abilities. Is this because of your bloodline? It truly is a cause for envy." The violet mink blinked and didn't say anything. The middle-aged man wanted to say something, but he hesitated for a long time and didn't speak of it in the end. He merely sighed heavily, and the helplessness and unwillingness in it was something that even Yang Yi could sense clearly. When he saw the middle-aged man act in this way, Yang Yi started calculating in his mind. This middle-aged man's strength is definitely not inferior to Taoist Zui and the founding ancestor. If I'm able to form a relationship with such an expert or make him owe me a favor, then I'll have another trump card and even more confidence when I face the Flower Palace in the future. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi stopped hesitating and immediately decided and said, "Senior, I presume you haven't come twice to look for the little fellow merely to meet the little fellow, right?" When he spoke up to here, Yang Yi paused for a moment before he continued. "If Senior needs our assistance, then so long as it's within our ability, both the little fellow and I can give it a try." A strand of bright light flashed in the middle-aged man's eyes when he heard this, and he said with slight excitement, "Are you serious?" When he finished speaking, he continued, "Can you represent it?" Yang Yi smiled, and then he gazed at the violet mink. The latter flashed over to Yang Ye's shoulder, and then it rubbed Yang Ye's ears with its little laws in an extremely intimate manner. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he glanced deeply at Yang Yi before he said, "Human kid, you're really making me more and more curious about you. Tell me, what are your conditions?" Yang Yi shook his head and said, "It would be best if Senior told us what you need from us first." He wasn't stupid. Wouldn't he be courting death if the middle-aged man wanted him and the little fellow to do something that was heaven-defying? What a cautious fellow. The middle-aged man chuckled and said, "Don't worry. I won't ask the two of you to do something that exceeds the scope of your abilities. I merely want to ask how it came to the Southern Territory." As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man gazed at the violet mink. Yang Yi frowned. He naturally didn't believe that the middle-aged man had come looking for them merely to ask this. After a long period of deep thought, Yang Yi said, "Senior, this is probably not the full extent of your objective, right?" "Smart human." The middle-aged man grinned, and then he gazed at the violet mink and revealed a solemn expression as he said, "Under the circumstances where no experts have weakened the seal, It shouldn't and couldn't appear in the Southern Territory. However, the problem is that it has appeared here. In other words, there's another method besides traversing the seals that can be utilized to move through the various territories. It's probably not difficult to traverse the seals with the strength Senior possesses, right? Asked Huang Yi. It isn't difficult, the middle-aged man said. However, if I leave the Southern Territory, then my Dark Beast Empire would probably be instantly annihilated by the humans. Moreover, I'll have to try and overcome the Heaven Path in the near future. And no matter if I succeed or fail, I wouldn't be able to appear in the Southern Territory again. At that time, the myriad of Dark Beasts in my Dark Beast Empire would probably be enslaved by the humans. Huang Yi said with surprise. Senior intends to migrate all the Dark Beasts from the Dark Beast Empire to the other territories? The middle-aged man nodded and said, even though Dark Beasts and humans are living in harmony right now, the humans will definitely act against my Dark Beast race in the future. With the greedy nature of humans, how could they not be tempted by the inner cores we Dark Beasts possess and the countless natural treasures within the Grand Myriad Mountains? They'll definitely act against my Dark Beast race. The reason they haven't until now is because of my presence, but once I'm gone, then the Grand Myriad Mountains would probably become the backyard of the humans. Huang Yi smiled bitterly when he heard this. Even though he was a human as well, he had no choice but to admit that this mysterious middle-aged man made sense. Because how could anyone not be tempted by the countless natural treasures of the heavens and the earth within the Grand Myriad Mountains and the inner cores of the Dark Beasts from the Dark Beast Empire? The middle-aged man said in a low voice, if the two of you are able to bring my Dark Beast race to the other territories, right, it's best if it's the Demon Territory. But if you're able to accomplish that, then this emperor will agree to anything. When he heard the words, this emperor, Huang Ye's eyelids twitched, and he said, Senior is the Beast Emperor of the Dark Beast Empire? The middle-aged man nodded and said, we Dark Beasts don't go back on our word like you humans do. I'll definitely do as I've said. Huang Yi instantly gasped when he heard the middle-aged man acknowledge his guess. No wonder this middle-aged man's strength was so terrifying. So, he's actually the owner of the Grand Myriad Mountains. After feeling shocked, Huang Yi couldn't help but feel excited because if the little fellow was able to help the middle-aged man, then wouldn't it mean that the Beast Emperor owed him a huge favor? When he thought up to here, Huang Yi turned to look at the violet mink. However, the violet mink brought him back to reality because it shook its little head before their gazes to display that it was unable to accomplish it. A wisp of disappointment that was impossible to be concealed had flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes when he saw the violet mink shake its head, and then he muttered in a low voice, could it be that the heavens really want to doom my Dark Beast race? Huang Yi frowned. He pondered deeply for a short moment before he said lightly, little fellow, how did you get here? When he heard Huang Yi, the Beast Emperor gazed at the violet mink as well. Obviously, he wanted to know the answer as well. A layer of red instantly covered the violet mink's little face when it heard Huang Yi, and then its eyes immediately started to spin about. Obviously, it didn't want to answer this question. Huang Yi rubbed the little fellow's head and said, stop playing around. It's very important to us. The violet mink puckered its face, and then it started to wave its little claws. After a period of conversation, Huang Yi finally understood why the violet mink had appeared in the Southern Territory. The reason was actually that it was playful. The general idea was that a battle had occurred in its clan at the Demon Territory, and that battle caused a mysterious spatial vortex to appear in her clan. The violet mink had been curious and playful, so it entered the spatial vortex when its loved ones weren't paying attention. After that, when it appeared once more, it was at this unfamiliar place, the Southern Territory. Huang Yi didn't know whether he should laugh or cry after he figures out what the little fellow meant. This little fellow actually even dared to enter a spatial vortex. Spatial vortexes are so dangerous that even an Exalt Realm expert would probably not dare to casually enter a spatial vortex. The Beast Emperor shook his head and smiled as well. Obviously, he hadn't expected that the little fellow had got to the Southern Territory in such a way. He could create a spatial vortex as well, but would anyone dare to enter it? He was clearly aware of the dangers and terrors that resided within spatial vortexes, and the slightest mistake could cause even an Exalt Realm expert to be instantly torn into pieces. Even if one were to survive out of luck, who knew where one would be teleported to by the spatial vortex? In short, his intentions to migrate the Dark Beast race could be said to have ended in failure. The Beast Emperor shook his head with a helpless expression on his face, and he was just about to leave. However, right at this moment, the violet mink suddenly flashed over to the Beast Emperor, and then numerous ripples floated towards the Beast Emperor. After that, the Beast Emperor's eyes gradually opened wider. After a short moment, the Beast Emperor gazed at Huang Yi. He gazed at Huang Yi for a short while before he gazed once more at the violet mink, and then he said, "I believe you, because since you chose him, then he's absolutely not an ordinary person." When he spoke up to hear, the Beast Emperor pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "Can my Dark Beast race become a vassal of your clan in the demon territory?" There were countless formidable demon beast clans in the demon territory, and these demon beast clans were absolutely not existences that the Dark Beasts of the Dark Beast Empire could compare to. If the Dark Beasts were to rashly enter the demon territory without any backing, then they would definitely become the slaves of those demon beast clans. If it was like that, then wouldn't it be better to take the initiative to become the vassal of a formidable demon beast clan? Even though they would be a mere vassal, they would have their dignity. This time, the violet mink fell silent. If it was according to its opinion or the opinion of those old fellows in its clan, then it was absolutely impossible. Because the bloodlines of these dark beasts was too inferior. An inferior bloodline represented that these dark beasts possessed low potential, and low potential represented that their future accomplishments would be low. To put it simply, it was slightly embarrassing to take these dark beasts from the Southern Territory as its clan's vassal. The reason the violet mink hadn't refused was that it knew what these dark beasts and this middle-aged man meant to Huang Yi. Huang Ye's strength was really too weak, and these dark beasts and this middle-aged man just happened to be able to help Huang Yi.